Good evening, all. In my ongoing reviews of 1970s, the golden age of Spanish horror, we come to one of my favorites, a very strange, atmospheric, and creepy, uh, very good, erotic, interesting movie. Jorge Larraz's Vampyres, and that's spelled Vampyres, from 1974, starring Marianne Morris and Anulka Dziubinska, who is was a Playboy playmate. She was the playmate for May 1973, and also a former Miss Britain candidate. I don't know if she won the title, but very beautiful blonde. And Murray Brown and Brian Deacon, Sally Faulkner, and Michael Byrne. And it was shot principally, the exteriors will be almost instantly recognizable to people because it was shot at the iconic Oakley Court. Oakley Court was a set actually built by uh, Hammer Studios and was used in The Reptile and also Plague of the Zombies. But most people will recognize it for a quite different movie that was made at this exterior site, and that was the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Oakley Court is Dr. Frank Anfurter's castle. It is now a hotel, and apparently it's always booked. It's very difficult to get a room there because it's very popular. It's in Bray, England. But the interior, that's where the exterior shot. The interiors were shot at a place called Harefield Grove, which is in the London suburb of Hillingdon, where Jose Larraz had shot another movie. And it's a 19th century, somewhat decaying house, has some interesting architecture, a really creepy fireplace, and an interesting wine cellar, and that's why he used it. I'll give you a précis of the story, though, again, I'm not going to spoil the entire thing for anybody who hasn't seen it, albeit this is a 50-year-old movie. If you haven't seen it by now, there really aren't very many things to spoil. The story centers on these two characters, Fran, played by Marianne Morris, and Miriam, played by Anulka. And they are two, you don't really know, and this is one of the interesting, they're not quite vampires, they're not quite ghouls, there's something else. And you're not quite certain exactly what they are. But what they do is they prey on unsuspecting men. They hitchhike, and Marianne Morris usually is the one who's hitchhiking, being the more attractive of the two of them, tall redhead. And they ask them back to their place. So their place is Oakley Court. And then they seduce them, get them drunk, and kill them. And they drink their blood. Although, interestingly enough, they do not have fangs. They have normal teeth. They do not bite people in the neck. They are not vulnerable to running water, as there's a scene where they take a very erotic shower together. And they can at least sometime walk during the day. They can't stand direct or bright sunlight, but they can walk around at dawn and dusk, and they're shown during several scenes actually walking around. They pick up this guy named, or I should say, Fran picks up a guy named Ted who's driving his then late model Mercedes through the countryside and invites him back. Seduces him and makes love with him, and they drink wine. And in the morning, he wakes up and he's feeling weak. He's got a cut on his arm that's very deep, and he thinks that he got this by falling on a broken wine glass. And although the interesting thing, they weren't using wood glass, wine glass, they were using pewter cups. So how did he cut his arm? He finds the caravan of these two people, John and Harriet, who are played by Brian Deacon and Sally Faulkner, who are camping in the woods in their little trailer, and says, "Can you help me?" And I cut my arm, and they say, "Oh, certainly, we'll help you." They've got mercurochrome, and they put it on his arm and disinfect it, and they wrap it in a bandage and offer him some coffee, and then he goes on his way, and he goes back to the. She said, "They say, are you really living in that? Does anybody live in that castle?" And he says, "I'm not really quite certain." And it goes back, and this piques Sally Faulkner's interest. Brian Deacon doesn't seem interested at all. He's more interested in, just, having a good time in the camper. And So he doesn't really want to pursue it, but she's somewhat fascinated, particularly because they saw them hitchhiking as well, and they didn't pick them up. And that's the difference. Um, One of the odd things that these men that they pick up and they drain, they dispose of them in a rather unique way. They put them back into their own cars and make it look like they had an accident. And an unusual faction of this is all the men, their watches stopped. And that makes you wonder, is this something about time being suspended? Is there some sort of a time element in here? I should mention that the movie opens with these same two women being murdered. They're shot to death by an unseen character, and all in black and with a Luger who shoots them to death. This is a British film, but directed by Jose Ramon Larraz, who was Spanish, made by SA Films in England, and uh, principally shot at, I believe, Elstree Studios. It's really interesting, again, without going into too much detail, that they're draining Ted of his blood through this cut in his arm. And there's kind of almost an implication here of like some S&M overtones. He's very submissive and they're rather dominant. And they do things like they make love to each other in bed, and all he can do is lie back and watch because he's too weak to react from being drained of blood. They're almost cannibalistic. They attack another guy that they bring home and stab him with knives. They short of eating him, they basically drink all of his blood and drain it out of him. The blood and the gore effects are quite shocking for a 1973 movie. Really well done, I thought. A bit over the top, but again, in one of the better things, the blood doesn't look too red. It has a blackish tinge to it, which is more realistic. Blood is not bright red. It doesn't look like, paint or whatever they used for the real blood. I think they probably used pig's blood, which was common at the time. But again, like I said, the effects are quite gory for the time and rather horrifying. They are not subtle in their attacks. They brutalize these men. They just like tear them to bits, basically. And you see this happen to several people, including a guy who's only known as the Playboy, who they pick up. He has like a fancy sports car, and that was played by Michael Byrne. And I'd seen him in some other things as well. And I'd seen Sally Faulkner in some other movies also. She said that Larraz was kind of hard on her, that he was very critical and very exacting, and he did not apparently like her performance much. This is a complaint that a lot of the people who acted for him stated. I did a brief review of one of the other films of his that I like, which is Black Candle, starring the beautiful German slash Portuguese slash Spanish actress Helga Liné, another rather striking redhead. Um, and she said that he was kind of mean to her too in that, and said, you can't act or something like that. He said, what do you do when you get a bunch of people who can't act? You just have them take their clothes off, which indicates he really wasn't very impressed by that film. And I don't know why, because I think it's really an excellent film, one of the better witchcraft movies out there. Anyway, getting back to Vampyres, they go through all these murders, and the young couple again eventually. Ted is getting weaker and weaker, and as he is drained, and Miriam begs Fran to kill him. Says, "You're playing a dangerous game," and for some reason she won't, and we don't really know why. Why she won't kill him, but maybe just she likes him. There's also an interesting scene that I thought was there are a couple of things. One, there's like I said, although they don't act like normal vampires, there are a couple of things. There's a covered mirror that Ted finds. It's covered over by paint. He peels back a little of it and sees that so they don't have no mirrors in the house. They sleep in the basement during the day, which is the wine cellar, I should say, during the day, which is kind of an interesting twist because that's also where they murder a couple of people. I'll get to that in a moment. I already told you about the Playboy. They took him down there. They got him drunk on these like excellent wines that they have down there. And then they just stabbed him to pieces, basically, and drained his blood. Again, put him in a car and made it look like he had a car accident. Um, uh, And one of the things that's interesting that happens, Fran is a painter, and she's painting Oakley Court, and they notice her, and they walk up to her during the day, which again indicates, are these people vampires? Are they ghosts? Are they something else? We don't quite know. What Fran does is very interesting. She takes her finger and licks it and marks the girl on the head and says, "By this mark, I shall know you." And that's a witchcraft thing. That's not a vampire thing. That's kind of a Wiccan thing. And I thought that was interesting that they had that in there. Um, she doesn't really quite act on it, though, later, which I thought was kind of disappointing. Um, what happens eventually is Ted manages to stumble back to the caravan and begs John and Harriet to help him. John says, I'll go drive to the hospital and bring somebody back to help you." And he goes out to the car and he's murdered by Fran and Miriam rather horribly. And, his blood's all over the place. There was an earlier scene where Miriam thought she saw a bloody hand outside the caravan. And John says, "Oh, you're imagining things. There's nobody here." And she goes back to look at it and it's not there. So this is a reference back to that, which I thought was interesting. Um, Interesting choice on Larraz's part. Um, the They also, take Harriet discovers that John has been murdered and screams and is horrified, and they take her down to the wine cellar and are tear her clothes off and advance upon her, and Fran slits her throat with this knife, and so basically everybody's dead except poor old Ted. Ted manages to stagger back to his Mercedes and slumps down into the seat and passes out. And then Larraz does one of his interesting tricks, which he has a tendency to do at the ends of his movies. Ted wakes up with a shock the next day, and a guy is rattling his window and says, "Hey, you can't sleep here. This is private property. Didn't you read the signs?" He says, "What?" It's a realtor. He says, "I'm trying to show this property off, and you're not welcome here. And next time, go drink your wine somewhere else." And he pulls out an empty wine bottle out of the front seat, throws it in the back, says, "Why don't you go get out of here?" And he's talking to the couple who are, thinking of buying the house, and the wife says, "Is it true that this house is haunted?" What they say, and he says, "Well, it's true that they discovered the bodies of two unidentified young women here a number of years ago. It's rather sad. They never found out, who they were or what happened to them. And, of course, there are stories about them, haunting this place, but, that's all nonsense. We can't believe in that sort of thing in this day and age, can we?" And Ted drives off, and that's sort of the end of the movie, and it just fades out on Oakley Court, and this couple who want to buy it, which I thought was rather an interesting way to end the movie. Again, something in Larraz's movies that time isn't exactly what we think it is, and that maybe what we've seen is just a dream. Maybe Ted fell asleep outside the mansion, and this whole thing was just a nightmare of his, or maybe there was something. These women have something to do with jumping through different points in time, and that's really that they really weren't vampires. They were something else. They were some kind of interdimensional beings of some sort. Very interesting, very creepy, moody, erotic. Some very steamy sex scenes for 1973. Four rather was shot in 1973. And just really good, a really good soundtrack, which the music was scored by James Clark. Very eerie, lots of shots of bats, although they use vampire bats. They don't have vampire bats in England. The largest bat would probably be little brown bats, which were only about like this big. But, vampire bats are from South America. But interesting, creepy, weird. I highly recommend it. It is available on streaming. I had to watch it on OKRU, which again I don't like watching Russian stuff because I'm not very fond of Russia right now. I'm Ukrainian by background, so you can understand why. But I do highly recommend the movie Vampyres by Jose Ramon Larraz from 1974, British-Spanish co-production. Written by the way, it's credited as D. Daubney. It's actually Diane Daubney. I think that was kind of at a time when women weren't really given a lot of credit for things, and maybe that was a little bit of machoism on Larraz's part too. There were some comments from some of his female stars that he wasn't very nice to them. But anyway, very well recommended.